going to be talking about a subject matter that many of you have written in about. You've personally emailed me, you've put it in the comment sections after the videos, and it's something that I discuss with clients in my office as well. And that is, when has your sexual fantasy gone too far, or what is that fine line? Now, I'm going to get into some more specifics on it so we can both here work it out together. But something that I also wanted to bring up was the analytics and who watches my videos. I do use them and I think it's fascinating. I've been doing this for the past 5 or 6 years. I've been posting videos, more so on a regular basis. And I think that that's been good for the viewers. I've gotten some good comments with that. I always appreciate comments. And so my typical viewer, 70% of the people who watch me are men between the ages of 25 and 40. The rest are women. They usually fall into the age group of about 40. So it's kind of interesting, and this has been pretty consistent over the past 6 years, and it hasn't really changed that much. So the other aspect or interesting part about you, my viewers, is many of you are in relationships. You're either married or in long-term relationships. And some of the subjects that come up in my feed or that you come to my page are on fetishes, sex addiction, pornography issues, cuckolding, um, open relationships, how to have better sex in your marriage. I have a whole list, and I think I might do one video just on it because it really is interesting, my viewers. And along the way, I've learned a lot from you, because from the questions that you give me, I do the research or I ask more questions, and I'm able to bring you some videos that I hope you're enjoying. Okay, so let me get back to the subject matter, and that is, how do you know when you've crossed that line between acting out your sexual fantasy or not? Now, the first thing I have to throw out there is, of course, if your fantasy involves hurting yourself or someone else, then that's just going to be no, it needs to stay in a fantasy, and it's not something that you're going to be able to act out. With that being said, um, the second category would be if you're in a relationship, because this would involve the other person that you're with, and you would be wanting them to act the fantasy out with you. Now, this is where most of the questions come to, because this is where the problem presents itself. And for instance, I'm just going to talk about cuckolding because I get questions about this on a daily basis. And that is, how do I get my wife interested in a cuckold relationship? And I've done videos on this. So that again would be taking a fantasy that you may have and trying to bring it to reality with your significant other. Now, some of the issues with this is it's your fantasy. Okay, so you are desiring it. You're also very familiar with it. This is something that maybe you've been watching videos on, you've been fantasizing for a long time. So to you, it's familiar. You understand it. You may not fully understand why you have it, which I recommend, if you do, that you search a little bit deeper and figure out why. But with that being said, your partner, your spouse, doesn't understand it. They don't know why you're interested in, I'm saying again, your fantasy. Let's say it's cuckolding. And so the questions that I get all the time is, how do I get my wife to participate? Or how do I get my wife interested? And the reality is that you first have to sit down and communicate that you have this particular fantasy, and kind of describe to them why you have it. That's why it's really important for you to understand it on a deeper level, so you can explain to them, like, what turns you on about it. And so it doesn't become so threatening or so bizarre to them, and you put it into simpler terms, like, the thought of watching you with somebody else, it turns me on because, um, you know, I don't have to necessarily do the work, or I don't have to have anxiety because maybe I have performance anxiety sometimes. And I know that you're getting pleased, but you still love me. You see, so there is kind of this rationale to it that sometimes if you explain it to your spouse, they might understand where you're coming from. Usually women will say in this instance, most of the time when they come into counseling, is, I don't know why my husband would want me to sleep with somebody else, and they just find the whole thing to be so bizarre. So for you to just leap to the next thing of saying, hey, why don't you try this with me? You can't even get to that point until you've tried to explain to them, hey, this is why I like this fantasy. So that's the first thing, is if you're going to try to bring it into reality, is that your partner's on board with you and they're interested in trying it out with you. And that's a very slow process, because you first want to be able to talk with them about it and have them, maybe get turned on with you. And sometimes even talking about it and talking about your fantasies, which I recommend in a lot of my other videos, is doing some fantasy work with your partners. Just simply talking about your fantasies can be exciting enough, and it can really just be left at that level, and you don't have to step over that line and involve, another person, or involve a fetish you may have, or, whatever your fantasy involves. So, that might be a place for you to start and an option for you when trying to work it in with a partner. And again, it is really, really important that you take it slow. And it's important that you don't have these expectations like, oh, they should feel the same way I do, because it's your fantasy. And perhaps they have their own fantasy or their own desire. So it might be nice for the two of you to even, have a discussion where you talk about each other's fantasies. So you can put it on the table, and you might find out that, well, you might like their fantasy and you're willing to try that with them, and they're willing to try with you. So it could be kind of a negotiation process too. So that's if you're in a relationship. I would say tread slowly. Also, if it comes to a point where you're just not able to communicate or you don't know how, I do recommend seeking help, talking to a professional who really understands sexual issues and how to help couples communicate. Because I find that when I'm working with couples, is one of the biggest issues is they don't really know how to express it to each other. And sometimes the person who has the fantasy even feels ashamed surrounding it, and even getting past that shame or helping them understand why they're having these fantasies, that might be a place to start too. Okay, so if you're not in a relationship and you're wanting to share your sexual fantasy with somebody, and you're finding it very difficult to find somebody to share it with, it may be that your fantasy is not something that other people might enjoy. I mean, that happens. So there's other alternatives to, obviously, watching on video. There's alternatives to maybe switching it up a little bit as far as venturing into a different type of fantasy. Sometimes I even recommend just not going on and watching videos and just maybe masturbating to it and thinking about it. The other idea is, I'm not going to tell somebody, oh no, you can't have a fantasy about this, or it's wrong for you to think about it, because as human beings, obviously, when we're told not to do something, then the thing we're told not to do just becomes more exaggerated, and, kind of suppressing it doesn't work. I mean, if you really wanted to try to manage your fetish, or change your fetish or fantasy to something else, you really have to think of something that's more gratifying that you're going to replace it with. Because the reality is, if you don't replace it with something, or you don't learn to manage it, you're not going to be able to get rid of it. It just doesn't go away. So you really have to kind of either get help with that, or think of something else that makes you more excited that you can replace it with. And we're embarking on this new era with, sex dolls are coming out and we have video cam, and there's just so much out there that, is enticing. And so if you also allow yourself to just kind of let go and have a free for all, that's not necessarily healthy either. So there has to be a balance to it. And the reality is you have to learn how to manage your time, manage your pleasure, and make sure that it doesn't take over your life, which some people do have issues with this, where it really does take over, their life, and they're thinking about it, obsessing about it, and that's not healthy. So if you find that this sexual fantasy is either you're wanting to act it out with somebody else, or the other issue is you have a sexual fantasy and you feel shame around it. You feel bad about it. You feel like there's something wrong with you for even having that sexual fantasy. And so if you are feeling bad about it and shame about it, you first need to work that out before you even try to go out and fulfill that fantasy, because you're most likely going to feel the shame and all the guilt and everything if you act it out on even a higher level. So that wouldn't be something I would recommend. I would really say, you have to work it out with yourself as to, if you're having a fantasy, enjoy it. Don't feel bad and guilty about having it. And, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you for having a fantasy, as long as you're not acting it out. So I guess that would be the fine line, would be, okay, the fantasy that I'm having, I feel bad about already. So no, you don't want to cross that line. Or my spouse doesn't want to be involved with it. So there's that negotiation process. Or, I'm just able to keep it into a fantasy and use it in different outlets that just involves yourself and not somebody else. And so therefore you wouldn't really be acting it out with somebody else. So you really wouldn't be crossing the line. So anyway, I hope I have answered your question on this, and I think this is an important topic. I think that it's going to change as life changes and as technology changes. I've already seen over the past 6 years different people having issues with different fantasies and things coming up that they're not quite sure how to deal with. Always be good to yourself, and try to be good to others, and don't do anything that's going to harm you or make you feel bad about yourself. And if you're in that position, I really do recommend that you talk to someone about it, because even talking to somebody about a fantasy that you have, that you think that there's something wrong with you, the relief of just sharing it with a professional can take away the stigma of it, and help you understand why you may have this fantasy and how to kind of manage it and work with it in your life and in your relationship. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and leave your comment. As you know, I believe everyone deserves to have a healthy sex life, and so do you.